Hey everybody, looks like we're going international for this series since discussing OFAC and real-time payments on a series on the Professor Payments website, which you can check out that course on paymentsprofessor.com, and also having had several videos on payment types of other countries and what they're doing, we've had a lot of questions come in on IAT. So, well, what's an IAT? Stay tuned. What is an IAT? Really, it's what's an IAT. It is an international ACH transaction, or an IAT. But what is an IAT? Well, an IAT means you're working with a debit or credit entry that is part of a payment that's involved with a foreign agency office that is located outside of the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. I'm going to say that a lot in this course. That's it. It's that simple. It's any debit or credit to a consumer, to a person, or to a business that involves an agency or the funding that is not located in the territorial jurisdiction of the US. It really is that simple. But boy, can it get complicated right away. Because that not located in the territorial jurisdiction of the US part, and well, some additional requirements that come with not being in the territorial jurisdiction of the US, and make it to where we gotta do some extra steps, take some extra precautions. As we look into the rules, we're gonna discover that doesn't necessarily always mean outside of the US, but outside of the jurisdiction of the US, and that there is even a further definition to financial agency. And according to the rules, a financial agency means an entity that is authorized by applicable law to accept deposits or is in business of issuing money orders or transferring funds. We're going to have a lot of that, a lot of definitions that is, in this course. And after defining financial agency, well, then we have to define being involved with a payment transaction. Well, any office of a financial agency is involved in a payment transaction if it, first of all, holds an account that is credited or debited as part of the payment transaction, or receives payment directly from a person, or makes payments directly to a person as part of the payment transaction. Or, there's the third part, serves as an intermediary in the settlement of any part of the payment transaction. You meet in one of those conditions and you're playing part to the entry. Now, we're going to get in more and more into what it means to have the IAT standard entry class code. Just know for now what those terms mean, because you're going to see the term payment transaction in the definition of an IAT, even though it may not be defined within the NACHA operating rules. But I do want you to know that in response to OFAC's request, we'll get into who they are later, NACHA, the National ACH Association, NACHA has provided guidance to ACH participants on how to use the term. Their guidance says, within the IAT definition, a payment transaction refers to an instruction of a sender to a bank to pay or to obtain payment of, or to cause another bank to pay or to obtain payment of a fixed or determinate amount of money that is to be paid to or obtained from a receiver. Wait, there's more. And any and all settlements, account entries, or disbursements that are necessary or appropriate to carry out the instructions. Wow, that's a lot. I know. We're going to get through this though. Something important to understand about IAT is that the message or the payment instructions, well, they don't have to come at the same time that the funding of the transaction happens. Wait, what do you mean? Well, let me give you an example. Let's say we have a SWIFT payment, and the SWIFT instruction message it's received by a financial institution, maybe first thing in the week, on Monday. And it has instructions to create an ACH file for a company's payroll. Well, then the next day, the financial institution receives the funding for that SWIFT message, but it comes from a foreign correspondent bank. Because that funding has come from a foreign correspondent bank, something outside the jurisdiction of the US, then the payroll items in that ACH file, they should be in the IAT format because of the funding that was received from a foreign financial institution. We will also see that IAT definition classifies international payments based on the geographical location of the financial agencies, financial institutions, or money transmitting businesses. the ones that are involved in the transaction, instead of basing it on the location of other parties like just the originator or just the receiver within the transaction. Wait, can you explain that one a little bit more, Professor? Absolutely, that's what I'm here for. So how about an example of just that? Let's say we have a payment transaction. Maybe it starts as a wire, could even be an interbank transfer, but it comes from overseas and then is converted to an ACH entry by a United States financial institution or agency that would be covered under our definitions. If it started and comes from a foreign agency, then we have an IAT. But on the other hand, if we have ACH entries that originated from an account at a US financial institution that are based on instructions from an account holder residing abroad, that's not an IAT. Because then it is a US financial institution moving funds in the US and there's no foreign funding coming from a foreign financial institutions. But if those instructions were included with funding in a SWIFT or a proprietary message sent from a foreign financial institution to the US, well, then we're back to it's an IAT. Wow, there's a lot to this, Professor. I know. Let's keep on going. We got a lot coming up and I'm going to help make it make sense soon. But how about this one? What if we have a domestic ACH entry funded over the counter at a USDFI? That one's pretty easy. It's funded by a USDFI, so it would be excluded from having to be an IAT. But let's take the same situation, but we have the same entry funded at or by a foreign bank. Then it would become an IAT because, again, funding is coming from a foreign bank. Now, those are scenarios that we're really working to simplify it down to the funding, but there is more than just the funding when it comes to defining everything. Looking deeper into the definition, we see that this definition does not apply to transactions that may involve data received or processed offshore, where the processing entity is not a party to the transaction and processing is incidental to and does not alter the terms of the transactions. Okay, in a case like this, the data is processed offshore and the processing entity is not a party to the transaction, well then there's no altering of the terms, as the offshore party does not have a financial stake in the transaction through an account relationship or even the settlement obligation. But still think it's a little complicated? Well, guess what? Here you go. It's time for the Payments Professor's Breakdown. So let's break it down and let's simplify things. There are three main things to consider when determining whether a transaction should be formatted as an IAT. We're going to make it into a simple formula. It is an IAT equals a payment transaction, which is instructions and settlement, plus financial agency being outside the territorial jurisdiction of the United States, plus, well, obviously, the use of the ACH network. You meet those three conditions, and guess what? You have an IAT. Because again, you meet those three conditions, well then you need to make use of the IAT SEC Code because it is required if the transactions are going to flow through the United States ACH network at any point. It's a simple formula to help you identify if an entry is an IAT. So what are the key things to remember, the key things to consider? Look at the payment instructions that were used to create the ACH transaction or entry. Or it could even be a file already created. Plus look at the funding for that ACH file. And remember this, the funding and the data, they don't necessarily have to be included in the same file. It is possible that one could follow the other separately. And if it does, you're going to have an IAT if you meet these conditions. Now, if the funding for the transaction is transmitted to or received from a financial agency located outside of the territorial jurisdiction of the US, well, wait a minute, you keep saying territorial jurisdiction of the US. Isn't it about time you told us what that means? You got it. The territorial jurisdiction of the United States includes all 50 states, US territories, and US military bases and US embassies in foreign countries. Anything else? Outside of the jurisdiction of the US. Now back to it. If the funding for the transaction is transmitted to or received from a financial agency located outside the territorial jurisdiction of the US, and then any part of the transaction is processed through the ACH network, guess what? You got it. You have an IAT. Wow! That's a lot just to determine we have an IAT. Can't we go back to your simple formula? You can. And it can be a lot. And before we end this class, it's important to know a couple of participants that are actually going to be unique to an IAT that we'll be discussing in more detail as we go through this class, or at least we'll be mentioning them. We have a foreign correspondent bank. What is a foreign correspondent bank? Well, a foreign correspondent bank is a participating DFI in a foreign country that holds deposits owned by other financial institutions and provides payment and other services to those financial institutions outside of the US again. We also have a gateway. Well, what is a gateway? A gateway can be either an ACH operator or even a participating depository financial institution that acts as an entry point to or exit point from the US for ACH payments. They serve kind of like customs of when you enter and leave a country. Thank you for watching. And as always, please feel free to email me, kevin@paymentsprofessor.com. If you would like more, you can always go to our YouTube channel. And while you're there, please hit that subscribe button. And if you really want even more, then you can go to the Payments Professor website, www.paymentsprofessor.com, where we have additional courses like the complete course on IAT and other information available to be able to serve and to aid professionals like you to learn everything that you need to know.